Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello, everybody. Welcome to a very special episode. We got two guests with us today, Scott Rosenblatt and Jeff Campbell. Hi, Scott. Hi, Jeff.
Hey, Vasco. How are you?
So I guess many of you listeners already know Jeff. Jeff is an Agile coach and is also the author of Actionable Agile Tools, which you can get on Amazon and directly from the author at bit.ly/AAT book. That is bit.ly/AAT BOOK, all lowercase, all one word. And Scott is a seasoned business leader who is passionate about communication, collaboration, and transparency in organizations. He sits on the senior management team at Meltwater, where he's been working with Jeff. Jeff has been consulting there for the past 6 years. So Scott and Jeff, why don't you guys introduce a little bit the work that you have been doing together so that we understand the context? And then we'll dive to the topic, which I have to say is a very interesting one, which is the role of management in change, in agile adoption and change in general. So I'm really eager to get started, but why don't you guys introduce a little bit the context? If you could go first, Scott.
Sure. At Meltwater, I manage numerous software development teams that are co-located around the globe. We have lots of challenges to overcome when it comes to communication and project ideas. But in our organization, we underwent a DevOps and Agile transformation, and I was a part of it along with Jeff and some others.
Yeah, and I guess we've worked together on 5 or 6 different teams now at this point, I feel like.
Yeah.
It's been 5.5 years we've been working sort of directly together, I think. Scott's also one of the organizers of DevOpsicon, which we did an earlier episode on, me and Gene Connolly. And he was sort of the manager, I think I mentioned in that episode, who was very good at driving the message home of why this was valuable. So we've worked together on a lot of different stuff.
And for those of you who haven't listened to that episode with Gene and Jeff, this is basically a tutorial on how to organize a company-wide event, right? That ultimately leads to quite a large transformation. You guys were at that moment in the midst of a DevOps cultural transformation, if I remember correctly, Jeff.
Yeah, when the thing started out, we were. Yeah, exactly.
Very good. I'll put the link on the show notes so that people can go in and actually listen to this episode, which I'm sure will be a great complement for today's episode. Now, guys, one of the common things that I hear when I talk to people at meetups, the questions I see online, and also when people come up to me at conferences, they usually say, how do I convince my manager to ... Or I want to do the right thing, but they won't let me. And typically they means the management. So let's start with you, Scott, and get your perspective on what is this idea of managing resisting change? What is it from your perspective, i.e. being a manager, walking in the shoes of the management?
Yeah, so I've actually been on both sides of this, where I've been that developer, that employee feeling that problem where I have ideas and change what isn't being allowed. And since I've moved into management, I've been trying to be attuned and aware, listening for those kinds of cues. But it could actually be the case that management won't let people make changes or suggest changes. But the flip side is it actually falls on the employee to try it, I think, to try and figure out and better understand why management isn't listening to them. Is it style or the information or the technical level versus business value, whatever it may be?
Yeah, and I think this touches on the first sort of important point I want to make around this is yeah, we have a tendency to think, we can mention something one time, we can just say it, and then if it's not immediately taken to heart the way that we do things, or the thing that we've suggested, then we've been denied and it's become somebody else's fault. And I think that this attitude is sort of one of the big problems we see in the software development industry, period, is sort of blaming somebody else for the things that are going wrong, instead of saying, okay, well, that didn't work. What is the next thing that I should try? Or what do I need to, like Scott said, adjust about my style to make sure that this is working? Great example of that is these conversations where, you tell your manager what you think is the problem. They're almost always the result of sort of people getting frustrated, and they come across as a very frustrated and enraged conversation, which is not a great way to create change. When you're sort of half yelling or even possibly yelling about something, then there's a problem with your style right there that's preventing you from creating any change.
So, Scott, from your perspective, what are kind of the mismatches in language and level that you have witnessed, both as a manager and as a developer way back when, in terms of communication, these mismatches that, as some people put it, lead to resistance?
The possibilities could be all over the place, and that's where the real challenge is, right? And in saying that there's a focus where the employee has to change their delivery style or technical level or business value, I'm not minimizing that the manager has to play a deeper role in better understanding that problem too, right? As a manager, it's my responsibility to make sure that the message being delivered by my employees is heard the right way at whatever level of management that message tries to get to. And so there are many times where I've seen developers come with a technical solution to something and not focus on the value that the business will see out of making that technical change. And that's a collaboration between the engineers, the managers, to try and mold that message from here's what we want to do technically to here's why the business needs to allow us to spend time on this project or this work. And that's huge.
And there you're touching on one of the very first practical solutions, I think, Scott, is this collaboration on the message that you're trying to deliver. This is something that working together with Scott has been really good on. Is I'm a bit of a wordsmith, so I don't generally have any trouble coming up with words to say or creating a document to communicate the message I want. But then I'll go and I'll give it to somebody like Scott and probably a few other people who will then give feedback and say how this might be perceived or what kind of weight this what kind of subtext this word carries or that way of saying it carries that could be changed into something more valuable to better get your message across. And so we generally
wait a minute, you're saying we should craft our messages incrementally just like software? That's crazy.
That is exactly what I'm saying, actually. And that's exactly what we do when we're working on something. And it is a two-way process. And I think that's the important thing here, right? Just because Scott says I should change something doesn't necessarily mean I change it. Or sometimes he changes something and then I make another change saying, well, this is sort of diluting the message or whatever it might be. Yeah. But it's a continuous process of improving that until we get to where we want. And then that might just be to get it sort of to the next level. Then we might need to make another increment for the next thing we want to do.
And there's huge benefits doing that incrementally, especially as somebody who's frustrated that they're not being listened to. A lot of time your emotion will show in that message. And what you want to do is try and pull that back slightly. And again, focus on the value of what you're trying to propose.
One thing that definitely comes to mind as you guys were describing this, even crafting a document and kind of editing it together, it also helps us to crystallize the message and to step out of the emotional, perhaps charged perspective, right? Because you are putting the words outside and other people are looking at it and the words evolve and the message evolves. And at some point, it is just a message. It is not something that, you feel so strongly you might even start shouting.
Yeah.
And this is the key, right? What you need to focus on is the goal. I mean, it can feel good to be the one who finally got so upset they started shouting or quit their job or whatever it might be. That might actually feel good in the moment. But if your goal is to actually create change, then that's the thing you want to work towards, right? Not the momentary making yourself feel better of getting upset.
And understanding why those changes are being made is huge, right? That's one of the things that I suggest my employees do. If it appears like I'm not listening to their ideas, ask why. What am I not hearing? Why is it that they're delivering a message that they that isn't being heard? Why can't something be done? Why are these words being changed on the page? It's always good to ask why. It helps you grow and learn and try and understand how somebody else is perceiving the same message that you're trying to deliver.
And also that crafting together also, that builds understanding between the two of you as well. And by the end of crafting that message, not only do I now have a message, but I now have an ally in Scott who can be there, making my case for me when I'm not in the room to make the case, because we now agree on what it is we want to communicate.
Yeah, co-created messages spread faster than created by one single person.
Undoubtedly.
Yeah.
One thing, though, that I wanted you guys to explore a little bit more and perhaps share some of the tools you've used is how to craft that value for the business. And I know that there's several steps. It's not just a simple thing, but walk us through perhaps one example you guys have in mind. Maybe it was the DevOpsCon conference that you guys organized or whatever it was. But how did you get to the point where you understood the value and then crafted the message around value? Walk us through that.
Agile process at its heart. You got to start small and be able to prove that your idea has legs. If you can do that, that is the key to presenting everything upward. We started small with DevOpsCon. It was a grassroots kind of gathering, and the value was there, and engineers started getting excited. And now it's turned into hundreds of engineers pausing feature work in order to attend this conference and share information, and trying to explain the value from 3 or 4 people gathering in a room to dozens of thousands of dollars being spent and time being pulled away from the business focus of developing software. It takes a lot to get there. Mm-hmm. And you got to start small.
And I think also having some idea of what people are looking for at any given moment. I think this is the value that Scott really brings to the table, right? He's in the management meetings that I'm not in. He knows what people's current concerns are. He has a good idea what their objections are going to be. He knows the piece of language that's going to set them off. He has that understanding of what makes something valuable to them, and what aspect of it we should focus on, and dare I say it, what aspect we should maybe downplay in order to really make a valuable message, right?
Yeah, there are always hot button issues that you want to avoid if possible, while not lying, but not focusing on them as a benefit, even if you think it's a huge positive for the event. Getting everybody together in a single room and collaborating is great. But when you have a specific person who's focused on cost, or a specific person who's focused on how hard difficult travel could be, that's where the perspectives come in. Again, crafting the joint message with different points of view, being able to contribute to what the overall context should be.
Given just a really minor example of that now, but a really valuable one, I think one of the things Scott did when he started joining the planning team is he started having us take a photo of the done section from the DevOpsCon event, all the stuff that had gotten done, which I think is, probably 100 or more different sessions that we get done over the course of 3 or 4 days, and always including that in the summary email that we would send out to the organization saying, hey, the event was successful, and here's all the things that we actually did at it, and here's all the value that we actually got from it.
Yeah. Touting your success and the positivity of the outcome of the event helps tremendously, as does grassroots positive reinforcement. When we really got big with DevOpsCon, with other projects, when multiple engineers, when multiple groups of people from different parts of the business said, hey, this is really good. Hey, this has legs. Hey, this is something everybody should pay attention to. Again, that groundswell helps in the adoption of an idea.
Yeah, because what you also get is you get more and more of that sort of people building relationships, right? Now we have another person over in another team who's talking about this thing, and they're passionate, and they're discussing it with their manager, and they're sort of building a shared understanding. And now the next time we go to discuss the thing, now Scott and that person's manager is there to actually make the case for it. And I think, we sort of jumped over the starting small part, and this will be a little cliche, but I want to hit that point of experimentation again, right? It's often in these discussions, the people who say they won't let me change, I did the air quotes when saying they there, they come with a, everything is broken and we need to change all of this stuff kind of approach. And that's just simply not feasible. It's not how change actually happens, and it's not how businesses actually work. You want to, it's a lot easier to have the conversation of, okay, you're opposed to that thing. Well, would you be willing to try this thing out for, say, 2 weeks? I give a good example of that from Meltwater. This was quite a long time ago. I'd say this was 4 years ago, where maybe, if not more, where change was there was still some resistance in the organization. And one of the things a team I was on wanted to try out, we had a session with Woody Zuhl, who I'm sure you've had on the show at some point in time. He had done a session for us on mob programming, and we had a team who was very enthused about it, and they really wanted to try it out. And our manager at the time, who's no longer with the organization, she was very obviously skeptical, as everybody is when you tell them about mob programming. I'll just quickly intro it. Basically, mob programming is where you have all of the team work on a single computer working towards a single goal to produce the software. And, when you tell people about that, like, wait, we're going to have less people typing on keyboards, it's always this sort of shocked idea. So the way that we approached it was, we said, this is the thing we think is really important. We'd like to try it out for 2 weeks. These are the criteria that we're going to assess it with at the end of the 2 weeks, and we're all going to follow it up together, and we're going to find out. We're going to talk then about whether we think it was successful or not. So we did that 2 weeks, and what makes this a good story is after the 2 weeks, we weren't actually certain. After the 2 weeks, we looked at the criteria we came up with, and we said, we don't know for sure yet if this is something that's really improved the team, but we feel like there's something there. Can we have another 2 weeks to sort of try this out? And after that 2 weeks, there was no doubt left in anyone's mind that this was an approach that was working very well for that team. And now we have a lot of teams at Meltwater who do this crazy thing on a very regular basis. But we got there through the small incremental start.
Yeah, I will say, as a manager, the most impactful thing I've taken in working with Jeff and incorporated into my own life is that he had pushed me to, and now I've fully adopted and embraced, giving something a try for 2 weeks. It could be the most harebrained idea that may or may not ever pan out, but if multiple employees on my team think it's something that's worth trying, okay, we'll give it a shot, right? As a manager, I have to be open to be able to allow for that, and it's huge.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I wanted to explore, though, because as I hear you, Scott, I'm going to say, you look a bit weird for a manager when you say something like that, right? And so I think there's a story behind this relationship you guys have that it's worth exploring, which is how did Scott get on board? So Scott, tell us in your own words, how did you go from potentially being on a regular average management career development path to actually starting to take on this idea of 2 week experiments and deliberately working with your employees to try to help them craft what value the change they are proposing could bring in and all of that, because that's something that I'm sure not many people out there get from their managers. So walk us through that story, Scott.
It all came from having the experience of being told no to the ideas and having that they won't let me kind of feeling, not at Meltwater, but at prior employment places that I was. And as I started to learn the why and try and ask questions around what is causing me to feel that I'm getting a no instead of a question back around how can we change what your idea is in order to fit what we need, I realized that that's something that I wanted as an employee. And as I took my management path forward, I wanted to make sure that the teams were involved. And with joining it with Jeff at Meltwater and the rest of the Agile coaches there, it is something that we try and practice what we preach and listen to the teams as much as we can. Our responsibility is to make sure the teams are successful, delivering, and happy. And in order to do that, there is a give and take with ideas, with trying things out. And that's just the management style I've adopted over time and learned from, especially when being suggested to just give things a try that I wasn't comfortable with in the past.
Yeah, and I think that's the key is the conversation doesn't need to be much more complicated than that, right? Like, could you humor me and try this for 2 weeks? I've very rarely been told no to that. I'm not going to say I've never been told no to that, but I've definitely very rarely been told no. The company can't possibly dedicate 2 weeks to try out this thing.
To be fair, we've had conversations, Jeff, where it's not right now, but maybe next sprint, or maybe a month from now. But right now is not the right time. But let's try it out later.
Yeah, and I think if you're in an organization where it's a flat no, I'm unwilling to make even the slightest change for 2 weeks, then I think it's got to be okay. What change would you be comfortable with? What could we do? Because I always use this expression, if it doesn't work for everybody, it doesn't really work at all, right? And if we're in that place where they feel very uncomfortable with the idea that your suggestion, even for 2 weeks, then asking them to provide a counter option, I think is a good way to go about that.
Yeah, there's also a manager style, which I've encountered, where some managers are just hesitant to change anything, and it takes them time to understand that it's worth the effort to put forth to give things a try. And we have a half joke inside of our Meltwater teams that repetition is the key to learning. But in reality, it can help the manager. If you bring something up, you get a no, and a couple of weeks later, a couple of days later, you come back and discuss it again. As Jeff said, what are the challenges? What is it you're comfortable with? But some managers need a couple of days or weeks to process new ideas and information.
And that's not just managers. I think this is, and I've brought this up on this podcast before. I think that this is one of the big problems I see with Agile coaches in general, right? Is they say something once and people don't fully embrace it, and they're bitter after that, and people wouldn't listen to them and they wouldn't do it the way. Sometimes you have to say something 50 times before it hits home for somebody. Sometimes you have to slowly work it in there over the course of many months before they're, really ready to buy into the thing that you're suggesting. So just saying something once or twice is not always sufficient. You need to have, perseverance and patience that eventually the message you're saying will get heard.
And understanding, right? Again, asking why, not just why not, but more involved questions, deeper questions. What is it about this that you're not comfortable with? Or what is it that's concerning about this idea? Or is this just timing related? And trying to work with your manager to get that better communication path flowing so that you understand their thought process as to what the no really meant.
There's one thing that I really want to ask you guys, and I'm cheating here. You told me that you would like to talk about this too, which is to actually go deeper into an example. And there's an example you gave the headline technical debt. So why don't you introduce that, and then let's walk through that example.
Sure. Technical debt is typically considered very, very low business value. It is shortcuts or decisions made in the past where you're developing a solution and you've taken what should be a thorough, complete development process, shortened it to meet business goals, and put things on the side, accumulating that technical debt to attack at a later date. But sometimes that later date never comes. And it's because there's a perception of it's minimal business value. The product is out there. The solution is working. Why do we need to spend time to attack X, Y, or Z? And it's, again, incumbent on the manager and employee to have that discussion and understand what about that technical debt is important to the business, right? Is it because backups need to be tested? We have backups, but we haven't tried a restore. There's a huge business value there. As an employee, you could say backups don't actually count unless we've tried restoration or we've tried a disaster recovery scenario. It's about that context again.
Yeah, and I think backups are a great example of that, right? I think this may have even been one that we had at one point in time, is illustrating the risk that's actually involved in never having tested these backups. Like, for lack of a better way to put it, painting the nightmare scenario of what will actually happen to your business if we need these backups and it turns out that they don't work. What is the impact of that going to be on your business? That's making the business argument, right? That's making the value argument.
So I'm going to correct you a little bit there, Jeff. Painting the realistic picture. Managers sometimes have a gut reaction to hearing a nightmare scenario as if that's never going to happen. Come on. But if you paint that realistic picture of what could happen should something go down and you don't have a functional backup system, that's what you want to focus on.
There you go. There's a great example of that back and forth right there, live on the air.
That was a great example, by the way. Exactly, right? Like, okay, so maybe that's too much. How about this?
Yeah, exactly.
It comes from collaboration and trusting each other.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then again, it's that sort of start small. If we, if we're talking about technical debt as an example of that process, can we get, can we start bringing in one story a sprint where we work on addressing technical debt, and then, we ask the teams to do things like show what value the business is getting out of it. Is it, are we saving money by reducing bugs in production or reducing on-call costs or any of those sort of things? Or, are we saving money by making it easier to work on features in the future that are thereby making us faster? But, you can start as small as one story a sprint, or, have one thing going on all the time that's technical debt, or can we get a day or two just to sit down and try to address technical debt? Any of those different kind of approaches is a nice, small, incremental start.
Yeah, and the reasons, in addition to all the business pieces, can also be because the employees, the team, is directly impacted by not having this thing actually in production, right? Our effort is triple or quadruple what it needs to be because this little piece of technical debt over here isn't attacked. This will help alleviate our stress, our concerns, our effort. And then the manager can help sort of tweak that into, which also means that in the future, maybe our velocity as a team could be higher because of all of the impact that this little technical debt piece will solve.
Yeah, or cost of ownership is another great example of that, right? Technical debt almost very, very frequently reduces the cost of ownership of products, which is something, again, if you find a good way to phrase, is something that management can easily understand.
And if you have a solid process with solid communication, one of the things I ask my team for regularly when they bring up technical debt needs to be addressed is why now? Not in a negative way, not in a connotation of, well, why would we bother doing it? But what is now presenting us with the challenge where this piece of technical debt should be attacked versus other technical debt or other work? And that's where, again, partnerships with Agile coaches or other strong product-focused and process-focused team members can help explain that choice.
So when I hear you guys share this example, and I do appreciate you sharing, the real examples you guys have gone through, and talking about, even giving a live example of what that back and forth was. I can't help but thinking that this is as a change process and where management is involved. But it really is just like with any team that we work with as Scrum Masters and Agile coaches. It's all about creating communication and collaboration across that divide, right?
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
We try to pride ourselves that there isn't a divide in Meltwater. There is sometimes, but our goal is to have transparency and communication throughout the entire chain.
Yeah, and one thing Meltwater's been really good at, and I don't know if I could point to a specific reason why, but I think that it's helped a lot. And maybe it's because we've worked at it and we've earned it, but there isn't this sort of as much of a hierarchical relationship between a manager and a coach. The coach in Meltwater is a respected role. It's a role that, is partnered with the manager. I mean, Scott isn't my partner in the sense that he's senior management, but any team I work with that has managers, I'm of the same rank of those managers, right? My opinion counts for as much as theirs do, which is, I think, a very unusual sort of setup. Normally, the manager has some sort of authority over the coach, as it were, and that's not really the way we've made it. We're trying to get it to be we call it the trifecta: the product owner, the manager, and the coach, who are all responsible for different aspects, but sort of at the same level.
Absolutely. When I have leadership meetings with the leaders on my teams, the people who are the principals or seniors of those teams, it also, that conversation of both strategy and tactical also includes the Agile coach for that team and the PO for that team. And we all sit down and talk as a group. And that's hugely valuable because you get those differing opinions. You hear all the angles. It's amazing.
Yeah, I remember way back when we were talking about splitting up. This is when we both worked with the foundation team, and we had so many members across the globe, and we were having this conversation about should we split into two teams. And I'll never forget, it was me and Scott and Amr, who was on this show previously, all arguing different aspects of it, right?
Yeah.
All of us making the case. We all wanted something completely different out of it, and we all had different motivations, but we were all arguing on equal footing about that as well, right? We all had the right to have a strong opinion on it.
Certainly. Again, I view the manager's role as ensuring the team is healthy, successful, and delivering. And if people with ideas don't have the ability to voice those opinions at an equal level and I trump over them every time, then that's not a healthy organization.
And I think that one of the things that you guys have done now through this show is also to share a lot of tips and actually quite practical approaches to build that communication and collaboration across those roles, right? You talk about Agile Coach, product owner, and manager. In other organizations, it might be the technical leader, the line manager, and the Agile Coach. We don't really know. Like every organization will have a different set of roles, but it is important to have these different perspectives. Maybe it is the day-to-day execution perspective, the team, let's get this done perspective, the overall, where is this company going and how is the organization developing perspective. So there's these different perspectives that we need to bring in and create the communication and collaboration process around if we are to succeed with any change, small or big.
Certainly. And just like sprints have different pieces of focus for every sprint of business value, the focus of what the team needs to be aware of around those different items can change week to week, sprint to sprint. Because sometimes it is more important to focus on an emergency business value that has to be done. And sometimes it's worth taking the time to try out new things, to add technical debt to the work. It's all about that constant communication, transparency, and collaboration.
Yeah, one thing we've tried that I think has been, I wouldn't say it's been terribly successful, but I think the idea was valuable from the start. We had a conversation a long time ago where we were talking about each team should be spending, a third of their time on new feature development, a third of their time on sort of maintenance and fixing technical debt, and a third of their time on, improvement and experimentation and that sort of thing. I can't say as any team I think has ever hit those numbers exactly, but even just having that statement that all three of those things are important has helped a lot in that conversation.
Guys, this has been very insightful. I think this is one of those episodes where our listeners can just package it up, put maybe a call to action. Hey, I think this would help you do X, and give it to their peers. And also, why not to their managers? Because there's a lot of insights here. Thank you very much, Jeff and Scott, for sharing all of these insights. Before we do go, I do want to know where we can find out more about you and the work that you're doing. So, Scott, where can we find you?
Well, I'm a private, quiet kind of individual. I don't yet write blog posts or appear anywhere. So my LinkedIn profile is about all you're going to see of me at the moment. But Meltwater as a whole has a blog called Under the Hood. It's the engineering blog, and we talk a lot about our processes and our successes and our failures as well. And that's available for everyone to head out and read all the articles that our engineers and partners are writing.
Absolutely. We'll put the link on the show notes so that people can easily find it. And how about you, Jeff?
I'm still reeling from Scott calling himself a quiet guy. You can find me on rebelalliance.se. And of course, you can find the Actionable Agile Tools book at, you'd think I have that link at the top of my head, bit.ly/AAT book.
All lowercase, all one word. Don't forget that.
All lowercase, all one word. Thank you, Vasco.
And the link will also be on the show notes. Guys, thank you very much for your generosity with your time and your knowledge.
Oh,
Thank you, Vasco.
Us.
We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.